Hi, my name is Mr. Walla, and it's been a while since my first Path of Exile video here on YouTube. A little over a year, in fact. Long story short, 2020 happened, and on top of it, if I'm being honest, I really didn't have any good video ideas either. The whole year felt pretty exhausting. I streamed a lot less than I anticipated, and although I was very pleased by the positive feedback my first video got, I just wasn't motivated to make any more content. However, something positive that did happen this year, as you can probably guess by the title, was my dive into solo self-found. Today I wanted to share with you guys my experience with solo self-found over this year, what I learned, what I wish I knew starting out, and most importantly, mistakes that I made so hopefully you don't have to. By no means am I an expert at this game though, so this is not going to be a guide to getting rank 1 in solo self-found hardcore, but rather some advice for new players, or even more experienced players that have never tried solo self-found and were thinking about maybe giving it a try. With the recently announced Ritual League, Atlas passive points for targeted farming, as well as the return of Harvest, patch 3.13 looks like a ton of fun for solo self-found and a really good opportunity to give it a try. So let's get started. So why play solo self-found over Trade League? I think the answer is pretty simple and can be summed up into one main reason: slower, more satisfying progression. Gear upgrades, Atlas progression, crafting, in my opinion, they all just feel better. It is a bit hard to describe, I'll admit, but when you aren't trading currency for all your gear or buying maps for completion, each item upgrade you find or completion you get just feels really satisfying. It almost feels like you're playing a whole new game, and that can be extremely refreshing after playing Trade League for so long. Of course, this does come at a cost though. This slower, more satisfying progression obviously will mean that it takes longer to get things done in the game. For some people with maybe not as much time to play, this could be a bad thing, but for others, this means more playtime into a league and not getting bored 2 or 3 weeks in. If this sounds like you and you find yourself getting bored of Trade League, then I recommend giving solo self-found a try. I think the best place to start here is with the build you decide to play. For league starts in solo self-found, picking the right starter is obviously very important. In solo self-found, relying on too many uniques is one of the biggest mistakes you could make. Not only is it harder to get all the uniques that you want in solo self-found, in general, the more uniques you use, the harder it is to get things like life and resistances, as most unique gear doesn't have a lot of it, and you can't just buy the exact rare gear you need from PoE trade. This isn't to say that you can't have uniques in your build, but making sure that your build can function on mostly rare gear in case those uniques take a while to drop is always a good idea. And of course, you can still plan for your build to use rare uniques if they end up dropping as you play more and more, especially uniques that are attached to certain targeted farming such as divination cards, boss drops, or even specific league mechanics with the new Atlas passive tree. Some examples of this would be things like Colm's Heart from the King's Heart card, Dying Sun from the Shaper, or Shroud of the Lightless from Lich bosses in Abyssal Depths. Obviously, a lot of these uniques will take a while to acquire, but giving your build a goal to work towards can be pretty fun. Here's an example. For my Ritual starter, I plan to go Blade Vortex with the new reworked Elementalist. The only unique that I'm really hoping to get is Hrim Sorrows for 100% elemental conversion with Fist of Lightning. This unique is pretty common, and I expect to at least get it within the first week of playing. Every other piece of gear besides that, I am perfectly okay with having rare for a long time. But with that being said, uniques such as Wise Oak, Impulse's Broken Heart, Call of the Brotherhood, Devouring Diadem would all be amazing upgrades for me, but aren't needed to play the build. Some other good examples of builds like this would be builds like E.T. Contagion, Assassin Blade Blast, or Chieftain Blade Blast. All pretty strong builds even without the best gear. One big mistake that I made when I first started playing SSF was not picking up some of the more common currencies that you normally wouldn't pick up in Trade League as it's inefficient. However, since you can't just buy the currency you need with Chaos, some of these more common currencies are extremely important and you're going to want to get in the habit of picking them up. Here's a list of the types of currencies I'm talking about. Transmutes and Blacksmith's Whetstones. These currencies fall under the same category as they are picked up in order to make sure you always have Wisdom and Portal Scrolls in addition to their normal uses. Transmutes and Whetstones both sell for 4 Wisdom Scrolls each at vendors, which you can then buy Portal Scrolls with at vendors like Lonnie. Chance Orbs. These are really important to have for buying early low tier maps from Zana for completions, and also for chancing white bases for certain uniques you may want. You can also buy Orbs of Scouring with these, as you will definitely find yourself low on Scours at one point or another. Alterations and Augmentations. Hands down, one of the most valuable currencies in Soul Self-Found are Orbs of Alteration. You are going to want to get as many of these as you possibly can for crafting, which I'll go over in a bit. Selling lots of identified rare gear you find is a good way of getting more alterations. I included augments as well, since most of the time you are going to need them when alt crafting. Jewelers and chromatics. This one is pretty obvious, but you always want to have these stocked up for when you need to color or socket your gear. Also, when coloring gear, remember that you can use the jeweler trick if you need a lot of off colors. The jeweler trick is a way of getting easy off colors in your gear using the socket crafts obtained in Delve. For certain items, this could save you a lot of chromatics. Let's say you wanted to get 3 red sockets and a blue socket on this pair of sorcerer boots. If you tried just spamming chromatic orbs on it, you would be wasting a lot of currency since sorcerer boots are int based. You could also use the 3 red socket craft, but even that is a bit of a waste. What you could do instead is start off by using the 2 socket craft, followed by the 2 red socket craft. You then alternate between the 3 socket craft and the 2 socket craft until you hit 3 red sockets. You could also continue doing this for 4 red sockets with the 4 socket and 3 socket craft, but since we only need a blue, it should be easy to get it with the 4 socket. This is much cheaper than if you were to try to use chromatics, using a few chromatics and some jeweler's orbs compared to using hundreds of chromatics. I realize that this isn't really a Soul Self-Found specific thing, but I thought it was worth mentioning just in case you didn't know about it. Anyways, back to the topic of smaller currencies, the best way I got into the habit of picking them up is moving them up with the higher tier currencies in your loot filter. Which brings me to my next tip, customizing a loot filter. Having a loot filter suited to your needs is a really good idea for a smoother SSF experience. There really is a lot of things that you can do to customize your loot filter, so I may miss some things, but I'll go through some of the most important ones that I use. And also, before going into this, keep in mind this is what I do for my filters. Everyone is different, and that's the beauty of customizable filters. So take what I do with my filters as a template and tweak it as you see fit. The site that I use to edit my filters is filterblade.xyz. I'll include the link in the description. My go-to starting filter is NeverSync's regular base filter. I'll use that as the base and then edit it for my specific needs. First things first is the smaller currencies I just talked about. I'll drag most of them up with the higher tier currencies, excluding transmutes and whetstones, as I don't think it's necessary for those. The next thing I'll do is think of potential uniques that I may want to chance. For example, I might have white Satis garbs show up in the filter to try and chance impulses. Of course, if you don't think you're going to want to chance any uniques, you can just hide this. After that, another thing I like to do is limit the types of chromatic items that drop. Even though you want to have a good stock of chromatic orbs, picking up chromatic items that take up half your inventory feels awful. So I'll usually just keep the small 2x2s and hide everything else. Then later into the league, if I feel like I have all the chromatic orbs that I'll ever need, I'll hide them all together. The next thing I want to cover is hiding rares that you don't want to see and keeping the ones you do for upgrades. Of course, this is going to be completely up to what you're playing or what upgrades you need at the time, so also this might be something you do after League start as you get into later maps. This one will take a little more time than the others, and to be honest, it's not really needed, but it is what I like to do to clean up my filter. However, I wouldn't recommend doing this until at least you've gotten into maps. Picking up all the rares you get while you level, identifying and selling them, will help you rack up a good amount of alts that you'll need for crafting things like flasks. Personally though, no matter what upgrades I need, I usually like to keep all the jewelry and small basic rares to make sure that I'm still getting alterations, as well as keeping good rares for potential builds in the future. Lastly, I like to highlight specific maps I want to run to make sure that I see them and I pick them up. There could be a couple good reasons why you'd want to highlight a map. You might need a divination card from them, that might be in a specific region you want to farm, or maybe you just really like the layout. So even after all of that, there are still lots of little things that you could possibly want. Item bases for crafting, uniques you might want to highlight, prophecies, div card, flasks, I could go on for a bit. But whatever it may be, make sure that you have a good loot filter that suits what you need going into a league so that way you don't miss out on important things you want to see. With the new Atlas passive tree being put in the game in 3.13, target farming certain league mechanics looks huge for SSF. And although I think most league mechanics can be helpful in some way or another, I wanted to mainly list some of the biggest ones to use for Soul Self-Found. These mechanics being Harvest, Ritual, Betrayal, and Incursion. The reason I chose these specifically is because they're all mechanics that give you multiple choices for your rewards. So for Harvest, it's a little too early to tell the extent of what we'll be able to do compared to what we were able to do in Harvest League, but even with only some of the less broken targeted crafting, it's still very hard to imagine it being bad for Soul Self-Found. Things like swapping elemental resists and targeted remove and add crafts will be really good if included when Harvest goes core. Like Harvest, it's a little too early to tell just how good the rewards will be from Ritual League, but judging by the inventories full of items to choose from, as well as being able to keep items for later purchase if you can't afford them, I think it's easy to say that this will be insane for SSF. For Incursion, there are a couple of good runes to choose from when making your temple, and some of them you will want to focus on in SSF. Some of these rooms being Vaults for extra currency, Surveyor's Study for extra maps, Hall of Metal for Legion mobs and general loot, and even Tier 3 storage rooms for potential League-specific uniques. And last but not least, Betrayal. Along with having some good Veil crafts that you'll want to eventually have, there are a bunch of great reward options from Syndicate hideouts that you'll want to look for. Hillock can give armor and weapon quality up to 20%, which is really nice for when you're trying to 6-link items. Rank 3 Leo in Research gives a free Exalt Slam to a rare item. Chimera in Transportation gives League-specific uniques. You can even get specific scarabs from certain members in Intervention. And this is only to name a few, as there are a lot more reward options from Betrayal. Make sure to look into all of them to see what might be good for your character. To start off with crafting, I want to first mention PoEDB. This is a database that shows you every mod in the game, as well as other helpful information. I think this site is pretty important to figuring out what suffixes and prefixes you need and how rare they are before you start crafting. It's certainly not needed to craft by any means, but I think it's still super helpful if you're confused about what mods you can craft on a certain item, as well as what item level is needed for certain tiers of a mod to be crafted. I'll make sure to include a link to this in the description. So, what type of crafting can we do in Solo Self-Found? Obviously, not every piece of gear that you want for your character is going to drop from monsters. For some more build-specific items, you're going to need to craft them. So let's talk about some methods. Like I mentioned before, alterations are very good to keep stocked up on. If you start playing SSF, you're going to be doing a lot of alt crafting, most of the time in combination with regals. Here's some examples. Flasks are probably one of the most common ones since it's really the only way to craft them, along with beast crafts. Also, make sure to remember to use beast crafts for your flasks. This will save a ton of alts as you'll be able to easily add immunities onto your flasks as long as they have open suffixes. It's very uncommon to find a jewel on the ground that's actually good for your build, so most of the time you're going to have to make them yourself. Since jewels are so strong, and most builds use 3 to 4, you'll find yourself spending a ton of alts on jewel crafting. Further into the league, as you are killing higher level conquerors, you might acquire some influence bases to craft on. Some influence bases can have pretty powerful mods crafted onto them, that could be huge upgrades for your build. Some mods you won't need too many alts to get, however other mods like Explodey Chest are very rare and require quite a bit of alts and augments. Next we have essence crafting. Essences can be useful at pretty much all stages of the game, from leveling at league start all the way to endgame once you start getting some higher tier essences. Essences are a really nice way to get some guaranteed mods when you roll your item. Of course, this is in hopes that the rest of the item isn't total garbage. Either way, it's still nice to have the guaranteed mods. During leveling, you can start encountering essence monsters as soon as you start Act 1, and you can use these low level essence monsters as basically free alchemies in order to get things like early movement speed boots or even just any item that isn't white. One of the more common essences you'll want to use are essences that craft specific resistances on either your belt, boots, helmet, or armor in order to get the resistances you need. Once you start upgrading these, you can guarantee some pretty respectable resist rolls on your gear. Other essences are also pretty strong when you start upgrading them, allowing you to get some pretty nice guaranteed damage rolls. Also, make sure to save your Remnants of Corruption for later. You will want to have these for when you encounter an essence monster trapped by either Essence of Scorn, Envy, Misery, or Dread. You can corrupt these with your Remnant of Corruption for a chance at any of the big 4 special higher tier essences that provide unique crafts onto your gear. For me personally, I don't fossil craft too much because simply I don't really enjoy delving, and the only real delving I do each league is for socket crafts, so I really don't have too much to add here. But if you enjoy delving, fossils are always a strong deterministic crafting option, especially with the new Atlas delve passives for gaining more sulfite. Like I mentioned before, harvest crafting is very good, and if you played in Harvest League, I don't think I have to convince you. If you didn't play in Harvest League and don't know about harvest crafting, it's pretty much an item editor. Granted, it might be a much slower item editor in 3.13 compared to Harvest League, the amount of targeted crafting and rerolling that you can do makes gearing pretty easy. In addition to PoEDB, another good site I'd recommend you utilize is Craft of Exile. With this, you can actually simulate all different types of crafts on items, such as alteration crafting, to see the average amount of resources it would take to get the mods you want. I really do apologize though, it seems like half of this video is just me recommending different sites and programs, but if you've been playing Pee-wee long enough, you know that half of the game is actually playing and the other half is, well, using third-party programs. Anyways, link to that in the description as well. Another huge mistake that I made early into playing Soul Southbound this year was not utilizing Zana enough. Not only does Zana's shop provide you with potential maps you need for completion, her Atlas mission also provides maps for completion as well as the best way of getting Uberlab trials as fast as possible on League Start. So if you still need trials for Uberlab, make sure you check all of her missions for a trial each time she's in your map. Another thing about Zana that some people may not know is whenever you load a Zana mission to your map, her shop resets. So make sure to check her shops every reset, especially later on, as Zana will offer rarer maps such as Elder and Shaper Guardians, as well as Synthesis bosses. Also keep in mind that you don't actually have to do the mission you loaded up in the map for the shop to reset, but with that being said, I wouldn't recommend wasting free maps either. The last bit of advice I want to share with you guys today is pretty simple, but extremely important. Make sure to be smarter about where and when you use your currency. Starting out, it's pretty easy to forget that you're in Soul Southbound, and that you can't just buy other currency with Chaos and Exalt. So maybe try not to craft just for the sake of getting a cool item you don't even know you'll use. Or maybe wait for that 28% quality on your armor from Hillock that's about to be ready before spamming fusings. Or maybe instead of being impatient with off-coloring those boots and spamming it with 500 chromes only to not get it and be filled with regret, just take a couple minutes to go in the damn delve mines for the socket crafts needed for the jeweler trick. Of course, I wouldn't be mentioning these type of things if they weren't from my own experience this year. The main point I'm trying to make is just to think every time you use your currency, because you're on a limited supply. And that's going to wrap up this video. I really hope that it was helpful. This is definitely a different kind of video compared to my first one, so I'd love to hear any kind of feedback you guys have, especially things that I could have done better. I'm still very new to content creation, and there are definitely things I could work on, so let me know what those things are. Of course, I do stream Path of Exile live on Twitch at twitch.tv/MrWalla, so if you have any questions about Soul Southbound or Pee-wee in general, don't hesitate to ask me there. Thanks for watching guys, have a great day, and have a fantastic League Start.